So we're here on Daf Dalid, and we've been discussing three statements of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Let's just review them. First of all, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi obligates a drasha on the part of the Chacham in an event that there's an overlap of Purim on Shabbos. So that even though we can't read the Megillah, but the Chacham is required to darshan, he'll interpret the Psukim in Megillah Esther, he'll be Mefarsim the Nes, and that takes place on Shabbos. Another statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi obligates the women in Mikra Megillah. And we saw that Tosfos Dibar Maskil Noshim, which is towards the top of the Omud, he points out that the Bahag holds that women do not have exactly the same chiyuv as men. Men are chayav in kriya, women are only chayav in shmir. Then the Tosfos Af points out that there are two ways of learning Afein Hoyvos Nes. One is, as the Rashbam says in Psachim, Ikar Hanes Hoya Al Yodam, Bepurim Al Yidei Esther, Bechanak Al Yidei Yehudis, Bepesach B'schus Tzidkonios Posador Nigla B'Seinu Mitzrayim. However, he says the language of Af seems to indicate that women are also included, but not that they are the major force behind the miracle. And therefore, he interprets that they were included in the Gzera, in the case of Haman, in the Gzera of Laharag Lahashmid, in the case of Pesach, they were also Mishubadas L'Par Mitzrayim, and the Gzera in the time of Hanukkah also applied very much to the women folk, and that has to do with Tibor Leheg. Those were some of the statements of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And finally, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi establishes a double chiyuv to read the Megillah both at night and by day. And the Gemara offers two variant possible derivations for that principle, that chiyuv of a double kriyas Megillah by night and by day. So we're going to start now. Before we turn to Daf Daled Amud Beis, on the bottom of Daf Daled Amud Aleph, 3 lines up before the bottom of the Dam, and this is an extension of what the Mishnah says that the Kfarim, those who live in the villages, Makdimim Liyom HaKnisa, they will read the Megillah earlier on a Monday or a Thursday. That's called Yom HaKnisa. Omer Rab Chanina, Chachamim Ekelu Al Hakfarim Lios Makdim Liyom HaKnisa K'dei Sheyisapu Mayim Umazon Lacheim Shebekrachim. According to the approach of Rabbi Chanina, this takana allowing Hakdamas Hakriya Yom HaKnisa for the Kfarim to be makdim and read the Megillah earlier, before the 14th, this was all done for the purpose and for the help of the krachim, of the larger cities, because the villagers, they had farms, they were involved in agriculture, they would bring food and water to the big cities, and they would supply the people with mayim and mazon. And that was the way on Purim, the Bnei HaKrachim, we'll call the big city slickers, were able to have a Sudas Purim. So they needed the help of the Bnei HaKfarim to supply all their supplies of mayim and mazon. Therefore, we wanted to free the Bnei HaKfarim of that obligation on that day of Purim of reading the Megillah, because reading the Megillah requires that they gather together and they read the Megillah. It would take too much time. We wanted to, again, for the benefit of the Krachim, we wanted to free up the Bnei HaKfarim so they could deal with L'sapek Mayim Mazon L'Bnei HaKrach. So now we're going to start with Daf Daled Amud Beis. The Gemara asks the following question: L'meimer de takanta de krachim havli? Is it really true, your underlying premise, that the entire takana to be makdim liyom haknisa was done for the benefit of the krachim, or the big city slickers, which seems to be implicit in the words of Rabbi Chanina, who says kadesh yisapku mayim umazon lachein shebekrachim. So they were lenient with regard to the villagers, the Bnei HaKfarim, allowing them to be makdim kriyas of Megillah so that they would be free of that very heavy burden of having to worry on Purim about the Megillah, and they could dedicate their energies and their focus, all their attention on the Sapik Mayim Muslim Bnei Krachim. So they wouldn't be tarred with that responsibility of reading the Megillah. And the Gemara is going to question that premise. But Tanan, our Mishnah that opens up the Masechet says, Chal, if the 14th of Adar falls out, Leos B'Yom Sheni, on a Monday, Kfarim Vayaros Gedolos, Korin Bo Bayom. In other words, there is a scenario explicitly addressed in the Mishnah in which the Krachim and the Kfarim will both read the Megillah on the same day. Namely, on the 14th, if it coincides with the Yom HaKnisa, it's on a Monday. According to your premise, Rabbi Chanina, that the takana was made with Tovitz Bnei HaKrachim, l'kadmu Yom HaKnisa, we should have required that the Kfarim should read it earlier than the 14th. If the 14th is on a Monday, let them read it on the Thursday before that Monday, so that on Purim itself, on the 14th of Adar, they would be free to supply the Krachim with Mayim Umazon. So one says that's impossible. Why? Because Havi Lahu Asarav, Asar Lo Takinu Rabbanon. If you're going to go backwards 4 days from the 14th of Adar on a Monday back to the 10th of Adar on the Thursday beforehand, then you've crossed all the boundary lines, because we derive from Sukkim that the earliest calendar date within Adar to read the Megillah is the 11th of Adar. You're now setting it up on the 10th of Adar. So now is another objection to Rav Chanina. I'm going to show you a case where the Bnei Kfarim should be makdim and it'll come out to be on the 11th. Chalios, if the 14th of Nisan Chamishi falls out on a Thursday, then Kfarim Vayoros Gedolos Korin Bo Bayom. We're not going to be makdim the Bnei Kfarim back to Monday. The Isa, if you're telling me, Rabbi Avo, that the purpose and the goal of this Hakadomas HaMegillah, to read the Megillah earlier for the Bnei Kfarim, is for the purpose of serving the benefit of the Bnei Krachim, then how could it be that the Bnei Kfarim and the Ayoros, the Bnei Krachim, will both read the Megillah on the same day, on that Thursday of the 14th of Adar? How will the Bnei Kfarim be free from that responsibility, that tirdah, of reading the Megillah so that they can focus all their attention on supplying the Bnei Krachim with Mazon Umayim? And now you can't give me the answer that we've gone beyond too early, because again, if the 14th is on a Thursday, then Monday before that will be on the 11th of Adar. L'kadmu Yom HaKnisa de Achar Asarhu. So that's within the scope of the days. So the Gemara answers, you know what? It's possible to say, as we said over and over again, and that's how Rabbi Chanina would say it. I may have mentioned before, Rabbi Avo, sorry, I meant Rabbi Chanina, that the purpose of this leniency of being makdim in the case of the Kfarim to Yom HaKnisa is for the sake of serving the benefit of the big city slickers. Nevertheless, I'll explain to you why, in the case where Yudalit B'Adar falls on a Thursday, the Kfarim will not go back to Monday beforehand and read it on the earlier Yom HaKnisa, which would be the 11th, because what? Yom Knisa lo dachinon. In other words, this halacha of kedima, to be makdim the kriya, has its limitations. We go back to Yom HaKnisa, but we're not going to go back from one Yom HaKnisa back to the earlier Yom HaKnisa. Now here we have a question. How can the Gemara assume that maybe the takana of Kedima was L'tovas B'nei Kfarim, for the villagers, that we're going to allow them to read the Megillah on the day of Knisa, because that's when they come into the big cities in any event. That's when the Dayanim sit on Mondays and Thursdays in judgment. So therefore, we're saving them and sparing them the tirch of having to come back into the big city for Purim purposes. Let them just come into the city on the days that Dayanim sit, that's Monday and Thursday, and then they'll hear the Megillah on that Monday and Thursday. It'll be machzor. He says the following: the Gemara has a kasha on Rabbi Chanina. And what was the kasha on Rabbi Chanina? If, let's say, the 14th of Adar falls on a Monday, so let them read it on the earlier Thursday. And the Gemara answers, well, that's going to be on the 10th of Adar. We can't do that. But when the Gemara raises this objection, it implies that it makes all sense and we'd have no problem if this halacha of Kedima L'Yom HaKnisa was for the benefit of the Bnei HaKfarim. However, there are no Dayanim sitting on Purim. Purim is a day off for everybody, even the Dayanim. So there's no Bezdin that's open for litigation on Purim. So in any event now, you're going to force the Bnei HaKfarim to make a special trip into the big cities in order to hear the Megillah. Why? Because on that particular Monday, which is the 14th of Adar, there is no Yeshivas Bezdin. So that's a real problem. Toshma, let's go on in the Gemara. The Gemara is now going to quote a Mishnah later on in Daf Hey, Omer Rabbi Yehuda Emasai. When did we say that the Kfarim are maktim liyom haknisa b'makom she nichnasim? If it's a place where there's a bezdin kavua, and the bezdin, the court, will convene on a Monday and on a Thursday, and therefore the Bnei Kfarim will come in anyway to the city for the purpose of Yeshivas Bezdin, is then, since Nichnasim Sheni v'Chamishi, Aval Mokum Sheni Nichnasim Sheni v'Chamishi, if the Bnei Kfarim in a certain scenario have no interest, no reason to come into the big cities on a Monday or a Thursday. For example, let's say there's no Bezdin Kavua, is then Ein Cardinal Sel Bismana. They, the Bnei Kfarim, will read the Megillah on the 14th, like the Bnei HaKrachim. If this takana of Kdima was for the purpose serving the benefit of the Krachim, the big city slickers, so they could supply the water and the food, is then Mishum di Ein Nichnas Yom HaSheni B'Chamishi Mafsidu L'Krachim, just because the Bnei Kfarim are not coming in on a Monday or a Thursday because there's no Bezdin Kavua in that city. Therefore, the Krachim have to suffer. They have to be mafsid. And what will they be mafsid? Because the Bnei Kfarim will be so preoccupied with the reading of Megillah, because now the reading of Megillah for everyone is on the same day on the 14th, because it happens to coincide with Sheni or Chamishi, is then the Kfarim, the Bnei Kfarim will not be free to supply the Mozun Umayim on behalf of the Bnei Krachim. So the Chacham should be Mesakin that even in this case there should be Kedima, so that the Krachim will get their supplies and Tzarchei Purim, which will be supplied by the Bnei Kfarim. So the final answer to the Gemara is Lo Tema. The Gemara sort of retracts its original position. Lo Tema, don't tell me, don't say that the purpose of this takana is for the Bnei Krachim, so that the villagers would be free to focus their attention on supplying water and supplies. For the Bnei Krachim, Ela Ema, rather we should say that takana is l'tovas hakfarim. It's for the benefit of the villagers. And mipnei shemesapim mayim umazon lachem shebekrachim. What does that mean? It means that because we want to make this takana l'tovas hakfarim, and the reason why they deserve this special leniency, and why the Chacham considering and making it easy for them as much as possible, why do they deserve such a great gift? And the answer is, it's a reward let me just read it. He says, as a reward for the fact that they are supplying water and supplies for the Bnei Krochim, therefore, tiknu lehem sheyuchlu lahaktim liyom haknisa. Shenichnasim bo le'ir mikol makom. On Yom HaKnisa, they're coming in any event into the big cities. They don't have to be toreach to come in a second time on the 14th into the Ayaros in order to hear the Megillah. We'll read the Megillah for them on the days that they come in, even though it's before Yudalit, whether it's on a Monday or on a Thursday. And therefore, kshe'en lehem shum revach me'akdama, kigon b'mokum she'enem nichnasim b'sheni v'chamishi, then b'cholfen yitztarku likanes le'ir b'myuchal l'tzor kriyas ha'Megillah v'yenam akdimim akriya liyom ha'knisa. If they, any event, have to come in to hear the Megillah, there's no other reason why they came into the big city, because let's say there's no Beis Din Kavua, neither on Monday or Thursday. So they have to come in as a special trip from the villages, the outlying villages, into the big cities for hearing the Megillah. So we're not going to be makdim into Yom HaKnisa. According to the original understanding of the Gemara, that this leniency of Kedima Yom HaKnisa is to serve the purpose of Bnei Krochim, the big city slickers, then we would want to avoid an overlap in which both the Bnei Kfarim and Bnei Krochim will read the Megillah on the same day. And therefore it makes sense that if the 14th will fall on a Yom HaKnisa, that we have to be makdim to the earlier Yom HaKnisa. That was the problem that we raised. But now we're saying something totally different, that this takana, allowing the Bnei Kfarim to read earlier, that was a takana for the benefit of the Bnei Kfarim themselves, for the villages themselves, to save them and spare them having to come in twice, once for the Sheni B'Chamish Yom HaKnisa, and a second time for Purim. That's the takana. In an event where they would not have come in on a Monday or a Thursday because there's no best, there's no purpose, no reason for them to come in, then we'll have them read the Megillah together with the Bnei Krochim on the 14th of Adar. In the footnote here, he quotes the Rashba. So again, the whole business here of schar to the Bnei Kfarim, that's the backdrop according to Rashi's interpretation of why we would make Megillah and we allow this leniency of Kedima Yom HaKnisa for the Bnei Kfarim. The Rashba interprets that this is not about schar, we're not paying them for their tircha, but rather what the Gemara is saying is that the Chacham were choshesh that since the Bnei Kfarim are so torrid on Purim, with gathering together a minyan in order to read the Megillah, then they will be batel from Simchas Purim. And therefore, Hoil of Yom HaKnisa mit Asfim, with Kabtzim, and Hem Yachad, Kedil Sapek, Mayim, Muzzle, Bnei Noros, is Yelahem Yoser Kal, Lekabetz Minyan, Lekriyas HaMegillah. Since they're coming in en masse on these days of Monday and Thursday to supply, maybe even get at a profit, they sell their merchandise of Mazon and Mayim to the Bnei Ayaros. Therefore, it's a lot easier for them to gather together a minyan for Kriyas HaMegillah, because they're already all together in one place. And why do they get together? In order to be Masapek Mayim and Mazon. And then it's easier for them to get together a minyan for Kriyas HaMegillah. But in any event, the Haspakas Mayim Mazon is not the Gorim. That's not the reason why Chacham would make Hilchos Bnei Kfarim. according to the Rashba, that's only a reason why it makes it easier for the Bnei Kfarim on those occasions to come into the Yom HaKnisa, B'Sivish of Glola Tiknu, Lahaktim as Yom HaKriya. Okay, now we have to go on. The Mishnah says, Ketzad, how is it that we read the Megillah on the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, etc.? Chal lios b'sheni b'Shabbos. If Purim falls on a Monday, Kfarim vayoros gedolos karim bo bayom. If Purim falls on Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi, etc., etc., the Mishnah works it all out. So the Gemara notices now a certain discrepancy in the language of the Mishnah between the Reisha and the Sefer. Maishna Reisha, the Nokat Sidura di Yarch. At the beginning of the Mishnah, the sequence that is mentioned in the Mishnah is what we call Yemei HaChodesh, the days of the month. It says Megillah Nikreis on the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th. Umaishna Sefer, but when we get to the Sefer, the last part of the Mishnah, the Nokat Sidur the Yomi, the end of the Mishnah, the Tana writes the Seder according to Yemei HaShavua, Chalios B'Sheni, which means the second of the week, Chalios B'Shlishi, which means Tuesday. So we see that, in a sense, by talking about the days in the Sefer as opposed to the calendar days in the month, but rather the days of the week, is the Yemei HaChodesh Nimul Mafreya. For example, let's try to explain this. If, let's say, the 14th is on a Tuesday, correct? If the 14th is on a Tuesday, then the Kfarim will also read, just 1 second, if the 14th is on Tuesday, then the Kfarim will read on Yud Gimel, which is a Monday, right? 1 day early. And if the 14th of Nisan is on a Wednesday, then they'll be the Kfarim, the villages, be reading it 2 days early on the 12th, which is a Monday. But in any event, you see clearly that the emphasis here of the sequence going through one scenario after the other in order is in the sequence of Yemei HaShavua, whereas in the Reisha it's in the sequence of Yemei HaChodesh. More answers, Aidi, the Mishafchele Nokat Sidura the Yomi. For the sake of clarity, in the Sefer, he switches over to the days of the week. Why? If the Tana in the Sefer, the end of the Mishnah, would have followed the pattern of the Reisha of Seder Yemei HaChodesh, the calendar dates in the month, then the days of the week would be going backwards. In other words, he would have to start with a case in which Purim would fall on a Sunday, and there would be Makdim to Thursday, and read it on the 11th of the month. If, on the other hand, Purim is on Shabbos, then we're going to read the Megillah on Yud Beis. So we're really going out of order here in terms of Yemei HaShavua. In other words, if we consistently follow the pattern of the Reisha, and we mention the days of the month, and therefore we're going to talk about cases where you read the Megillah on Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, etc., like in the Reisha, then what's going to happen be, as far as the days of the week are concerned, we're going backwards. Because if you're talking about a case where we read the Megillah on the 11th, which is the earliest of the dates within the calendar month, then you're talking about a case where Purim falls out on a Sunday, if we're mocked into Thursday. Then in a case where the next case where you want to get Purim on the 12th of Adar, that's going to be a case where Purim, the Yudalit, is on Shabbos. So you've gone from Sunday back to Shabbos. Or, for example, if you want to get Kriyas HaMegillah on the 13th for the Bnei Aksiv, then it's a case where Purim fell out on a Friday. So you're going from Sunday back to Shabbos, back to Friday. And that's going to confuse the reader of the Mishnah. It's not clear, and it's just not a pedagogically a precise way of doing it. Therefore, the Tana writes in the Sefer, the Yemei HaShavua. The Mishnah says, Chal Yudal Lios B'Erev Shabbos, if the 14th of Adar is on a Friday, then the Kfarim will read the Megillah on Thursday, on the Yom HaKnisa. And the big city slickers and the walled cities will read it on that day, on Friday. So the Gemara says, Masnisim Mani, whose Shita does the Mishnah reflect? And the Gemara says, here's the analysis that we have to embark upon. Rabbi Yosef. Could it be Rebbe or could it be Rabbi Yosef? So now we're going to analyze the Shitos respectively of Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef and see which one of those Shitos is reflected by our Mishnah. That both the Ayoros and the Mikofas Choma will read the Megillah on the same day, which is the 14th of Adar. My Rebbe, first let's see if it can work out with Rebbe. Who is Rebbe? What did Rebbe say? What did Rebbe teach? The Sanya we learned to the Brayso Chal Yudal. Whenever it says Chal, it's a reference to Yudal Adar. Lios B'Erev Shabbos is Kfarim Vayoros Gidolos So the 14th is on a Friday. That means Thursday, which is Yom HaKnisa, is the 13th. Right? Thursday is the 13th. And both the villagers and the big city slickers and the unwalled cities will read the Megillah, Big Kedima, on Thursday, which is on the 13th of Adar. For Mukaf Choma, they'll read it on the 15th. No, I'm sorry, they can't read on the 15th because the 15th is Shabbos. They'll read it on the 14th, Koren Bobayom, on Yom Shishi, on Erev Shabbos. That's the sheet of the Tanakh. Rebbe Omer Ani, Lo Yidachu Ayoros Mimkomam. We're not going to undermine the normal pattern of the big cities to read it on the 14th of Nisan. And therefore, I'm not going to tolerate a Kedima for the Ayoros that they should read it on that Thursday, which is the 13th of Adar. Ella, but rather, Elu v'Elu, Korim bo bayom. Now we're going to link up the unwalled cities with the walled cities, and both of these categories of cities will read it on the 14th. So it comes out that Rebbe is reflected in our Mishnah, in other words, reconcilable or identical with our Mishnah, that if Yudal is on a Friday, then the Prozim and the Mukafim, the walled and unwalled cities, will read it together on that Friday, the 14th of Adar. As opposed to the Tanakama, who says that no, that the Bnei HaProzim in the big cities, the unwalled cities, will read it a day early on the 13th, together with the Kfarim on Thursday, Yom HaKnis. My time of Tanakama. What is the agenda here of the Tanakam? That the Prozim should be makdim their Kriya, even though they could read it on the 14th. I mean, Araya the Krachim are going to read it on the 14th on that Friday. And the answer is we derive this halach from a pasuk. And then we're going to see the various interpretations of this. It says in the 9th chapter of Esther that Yomi Kol Shana means a certain uniformity of all the years. You call Hashanim Shabbos. They should all be. So the Tanakhama learns the following. What is he telling me? Kol Shana v'Shana. In what sense do we make all years uniform? And what is the rule that applies to all the years, no matter what the situation is Ayoros Kodmu Lumkaf. We must insist that the Ayoros have a day that's earlier than Mukaf. normally that would be the 14th. But if the Mukafim, the walled cities are reading it on the 14th, then the unwalled cities have to read it one day earlier on the 13th. Is Afkan. If, let's say, the 15th of Hadar is on Shabbos, and therefore the Mukafim cannot read it on their day, which is the 15th, because you don't read the Megillah on Shabbos, they'll have to be marked into the 14th. And that's going to create a domino effect that Ayoros Kodbos L'Mukafim. That now we must insist that the Ayoros read it one day before the Mukafim, which in this case will be Thursday the 13th. So the Gemara attacks this drasha. The Ema, why do you interpret the pasuk of Chol Shana V'Shana that way? Why not suggest that Chol Shana V'Shana Ma Chol Shana V'Shana Ein Nidchin Ayoros Nimkoman? The Ayoros will always be entrenched in the 14th, always reading the Megillah consistently on the 14th of Adar. Afkan, here too, when the Mukafim have to read it one day earlier, the 14th. Lo yidacha Ayoros Koma. Let the Ayoros read it on their day. The day of Kriyas HaMegillah for Ayoros is Yudalad, and that's called B'chol Shana V'Shana. That's immovable. So the Gemara answers, Shani Hacha Dilo Efshar. We have no other choice than to be Docha the Ayoros from the 14th and have them read it on the 13th. Why? Because if you're going to insist that the Ayoros read it on the 14th, then they don't have an earlier date than the Mukafim. According to the sheet of the Tanakama, what's absolutely critical, it's etched in stone, no exception, is that the Ayoros have to read it on a day before the Mukafim. That's B'chol Shana V'Shana. That's where all the years are the same. Uniformity, without exception, the Ayoros have to read it one day early. The Rebbe. Now, Rebbe says that both the Mukafim and the Ayoros, meaning both the walled and unwalled cities, will read it on that Erev Shabbos on the 14th by timer. How did he interpret the pasuk? B'chol shana v'shana, ma kol shana v'shana ein Ayoros nidachim imkomon. So again, B'chol Shana V'Shana is teaching me something. It's teaching me something that's absolute, that knows of no exception. The Tanakama learns B'chol Shana V'Shana absolute, with no exception, is that the Ayoros read it one day earlier than the Mukafim. Rebbe learns that what's absolute and uniform for all years is that the Ayoros read it on the 14th. The Gemara now asks the Kasha on Rebbe, why not interpret it the way the Tanakama interprets the Ema, B'chol Shana V'Shana, Kol Shana V'Shana, Ayoros Kol L'Mukafim, Afkan Nami Ayoros Kol L'Mukafim. We always have to have the Ayoros reading it one day before the Mukafim on all years, and therefore, in this case, that the Mukafim have to read it on the 14th because the 15th is on Shabbos. Therefore, we should be marking the Ayoros to Gimel Shani Hacha D'Lo Efshar. It's impossible to set up a kriya of the Bnei Ayoros on the 13th, on that Thursday, like the Tanakama would insist that we do, because if that be the case, you're being doche the Ayoros L'Mukoma. And that's the last thing we want to do, is to undermine the 14th as far as the Ayoros is concerned. So even though it's going to turn out, says Rebbe, that both the Ayoros and the Mukafim are going to read it on the same day, that's fine. Because the alternative is to be Oker, the Ayoros L'Mukoma, and that we can't tolerate. So all this is Rebbe. And Rebbe's Shita is reflected in our Mishnah. My Rabbi Yossi, remember we said, Rabbi Yossi. So who is this Rabbi Yossi? What did Rabbi Yossi have to say about this? To such an extent that you want to reconcile the Mishnah and attribute it to Rabbi Yossi. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Chal Lios. Second. Chal Lios Yudalit. Right? Whenever it says Chal Lios, it means Yudalit. the Erev Shabbos. So the Mukafim, once again, cannot read the Megillah on Tesvav because it's Shabbos. So we have a Tanakama of this price, which we never had before, that Mukafim ukfarim makdimim liyom haknisa. V'ayoros gedolos korim bo bayom. This is an amazing combination. We never had this before, that the Mukafim will read it before the Ayoros. And that's what's going to happen here, according to Tanakama, this price, in a case where Yudal is on a Friday, the Mukafim can't read it on Shabbos. We're going to link up the Mukafim with the Kfar, the villages, and they're going to read it on Thursday, which is the 13th. And the Ayoros Gedolos Korim bo bayom. They'll read it on Friday, the 14th. Yossi says, "Hey, Mukafim kol Ayoros." I will not tolerate a situation where the Mukafim read it a day before the Ayoros to read on the 13th, but rather they have to read it on the 14th. Is Elu v'Elu Korim bo bayom, and that's exactly what we learned in that Mishnah, that both the walled and unwalled cities will read it together on the 14th on that Friday, because there's no other possibility. You can't be mocked in the Mukafim to the Krof. To the Ayoros. My time in Tanakama. Why does Tanakama insist that the Mukafim should go back to Thursday Yud Gimel, and the Ayoros will remain entrenched in the 14th on that Friday? The Sim b'chol shana v'shana. Ma kol shana v'shana Ayoros bi'ar basar. We cannot be oker the Ayoros from the 14th. But we have another absolute rule, ironclad rule, that you cannot have both the Ayoros and the Mukafim reading it on the same day. Is Afkan therefore here too? Ayoros bi'ar basar. Every year the Ayoros always read it on our basar. So now, wait a minute. The 14th is on a Friday. And you cannot have another day for the Ayoros because they are set in stone, entrenched in the 14th. On the other hand, the Mukafim can't read it on the 15th because that would mean they're reading it on Shabbos, which you can't allow. They can't read it on the 14th because Mano Shalzeh, Lokis Mano Shalzeh, they can't have the same day. So we have no choice but to be mocked in the Mukafim back to Thursday, which is not tragic because even the Kfarim themselves will read it on that Thursday. The Amos of Marias, Bechol Shana V'Shana. Why not darshan the pasuk in the following way? Ma Kol Shana V'Shana Ein Mukafim Kodmin Liayoros Afkan Ein Mukafim Kod Liayoros, which is exactly the way Rabbi Yossi understood the pasuk. That was an absolute unexceptional rule, a rule that tolerates no exception, is that the Ayoros and the Mukafim are meant to read it one day. In other words, that the sequence should always be that the Ayoros read it first and the Mukafim read it later. Here's a case where it's impossible because the Prozim always have to read it on Yudalid. That we can't change. We can't allow the Krochim to read it on the same day as the Ayoros. So Yudalid is off the agenda. And therefore, we have only one possible alternative, and that is to be makdim the Krochim before the Prozim, which is not the usual case, but it's the exceptional case. And that's going to be the Shita of the Tanakama, this price of Yossi, that in this case, where Yudalit falls on a Friday, the Krochim will read it one day before the Ayoros. My time to Rabbi Yossi holds that when the 14th is on a Friday, we're not going to be mocked in the Mukafim to Thursday. So the Ayoros and the Mukafim will read it on the same day on Yudalit on that Friday. In other words, the pasuk is telling me we have zero tolerance for the Mukafim to read it a day before the Ayoros. Let them read it simultaneously on the same. The Ema, we ask a kash on Rabbi Yossi. Let's say the Kol Shana V'Shana, Ma Kol Shana V'Shana is Mana Shel Lokis Mana Shel Avkan's Mana Shel Lokis. There are always two different days. One for the Ayoros, which we call the Prozim, and another for the Mukafim. Shani Hachad Lo Efsha. Here's a case where it's impossible to do it otherwise because we cannot have the Mukafim read it before the Ayoros. Therefore, the Mukafim will read it together with the Ayoros on the same day, which is on a Thursday, Yudalid Be'adar. The Gemara asks the Savar Rebbe. Now we go back to the first price that we quoted earlier, that if Yudal is on Erev Shabbos, Rebbe holds that the Ayoros and the Mukafim read it on Yudalid, and we don't push the Ayoros back to the Yom HaKnisa. Is V'sava Rebbe Ayoros lo dachinu Yom HaKnisa? Are you telling me that Rebbe has this absolute rule that the Ayoros will not be uprooted from Yudalid in favor of the Yom HaKnisa? Tanya, we have a brayse chal lios Yudalid b'Shabbos farim makdimim liyom HaKnisa. Okay, so now Yudal is on Shabbos. This is not the case that we were dealing with until now. So that Yudal is off the agenda, off the map. It's not a possibility for Kriyas HaMegillah because of the Gzeira D'Rabba. Is Kfarim Makdim L'Yom HaKnisa, they'll read it on a Thursday, which will be Yud Beis. Vayoros Gedolos, they can't read it on Shabbos, which is the 14th, is Makdimim V'Korim B'Erev Shabbos. They're going to read it on the 13th. So they don't have a din of Yom HaKnisa, but we can allow and insist that the Ayoros read it before the 14th, meaning on the 13th. They'll read it on the 15th, which is fine, on that Sunday. So that's the Tanakam. Rebbe Omer Ani, Rebbe says once you're undermining the 14th for the Ayoros, then equate them and join them together with the Kfarim and let them read it on that Thursday, which is Yom HaKnisa, together with the Kfarim on the 12th of Adar. So we see that Rebbe says that we are doch the Ayoros Mizmana, from the Zman Kavua back to the Yom HaKnisa. So why is it that in the case where the 14th is on a Friday, Rebbe is going to say that the Ayoros will read it together with the Mukafim on that Friday? Why not read it on the Thursday, which is Yud Gimel, together with the Krochim, with the Kfarim? Gemara says, Hachi hashta chosam zmanon Shabbasi behold nidchu yidach lacha zmanon erev Shabbos. He says the following: there, in the case where Purim, meaning Yudal, falls out on Shabbos, and Rebbe says that the Ayoros should be makdim into Thursday, Yom HaKnisa, that's because the 14th is Shabbos. And we have no choice but to be dochen. So Rebbe holds that once you're already being dochen them, then yidachu Yom HaKnisa, they should be reading it with the Kfarim who have this halacha of makdim Yom HaKnisa. But in the case where Purim falls out on a Friday, and Rebbe says that the big cities should not be removed from their place, that's because Zman Erev Shabbos, that is the 14th, when they read Iman Ozla Hadid Amar Rabbi Chabam Rav Huna. Purim, meaning the 14th of Adar, Shechalios B'Shabbos, Hakol Nidachim L'Yom HaKnisa. Everybody reads it on Thursday the 12th. So the Gemara said, what are you talking about? If Purim falls out on a Shabbos, so then the Mukafim, the walled cities, will read it on Sunday, which is the 15th. Elakola nidche, meaning anyone who has to be removed from his man kavua, which means the Bnei Yoros and Bnei Kfarim, is Idochel Yom HaKnisa. This is all Yom HaKnisa. Kiman Rebbe, that's Rebbe. So Rebbe holds that once you have no choice but to be docher and remove the calendar date for the Ayoros, meaning the 14th of Adar, then we're going to link them up together with the Bnei Kfarim, and together as a happy family, they'll all read it on the Yom HaKnisa on Thursday. The Kuli Almamiyah, according to all the Tanaim that we've ever mentioned here in this context, Megillah b'Shabbos lo karina ma'itaymo, Amarabba kol chayom b'kriyas Megillah, v'ena kol b'kiyim b'kriyas Megillah, gzeira shemi yitlena b'yadav, v'yelech etzel baki lilma. Yavirenu arba amos b'rishus harabim. Here we have the famous Gzeira de Rabba, which we've already studied in the past with regard to Lulav, if Sukkot coincides with Shabbos, with regard to Shofar, if Rosh Hashanah falls out on a Shabbos. In the case of Megillah, not everyone is a Baki. He's not an expert in how to read the Megillah. He's going to go to the Chacham so that they could help him in order to facilitate his reading it on Shabbos. And as a result, he's going to carry it inadvertently, when he's so bold, he wants to be able to the mitzvah of Megillah, he'll carry it 4 amos in Rishus HaRabim, which is an Issa Doraisa, and a time of the Shofar, and a time of the Lulav. Rav Yosef, Megillah. There's another reason why we cannot read the Megillah on Shabbos. There are 2 mitzvahs that go together on Purim, like horse and buggy, and those are Kriyas HaMegillah, Matanos Labyon. So the Aniyim, the poor people, will come at the time of Mikra Megillah and hope to receive their Matnas Aniyim. If we're going to read the Megillah on Shabbos, they're not going to get any money on Shabbos. And therefore, they masakin a takana not to read it on Shabbos, but rather they insist that we read it on a weekday so that the Avyonim could receive their Matanas Avyon. Tanya Nami Hachi. And we learned thusly in a brisa that the Aniyim are waiting to receive their matanas at the time of Kriyas HaMegillah. And the brisa says, Afal Pisha Omru, Kforin, Makdimim, Liyom HaKnisa, but Govim Bo Bayom, Umechalkim Bo Bayom. So here's a really strange kind of phenomenon. The Kfarim are reading the Megillah on Yom HaKnisa, which could be Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, on that very day, which is not Purim. It's only a separate mitzvah Megillah for the Kfarim. But nevertheless, as far as Matnas Aniyim is concerned, it's like it's Purim. Why? Because Matnas Aniyim is always schlepped along, always attached to Kriyas HaMegillah. Now, the language here, the Brisa, is very strange. It says, Afal Pisha Omru. What do you mean, Afal Pisha Omru? It's not Afal Pisha. It's because they said that the Kfarim are reading the Megillah earlier on the Yom HaKnisa, therefore the Aniyim will come on that day. So the Gemara immediately raises this objection. Afal Pisha Omru, quote unquote. Are you telling me that Mispara, we should not be dividing up giving out the Matanos on the day of Adarab? Mishum the Omru. It's because they're mocked in the Kriya to an earlier calendar date. That's why the Aniyim should be given their portion on an earlier calendar date. Ella, but rather we should change the text of the rice. Hoil v'yom, not afal pisham, but hoil v'yom. Since the Chacham established that Kfar Makdim Yom HaKnisa is therefore Govim Bo Bayom, Mechalkim Bo Bayom. That is the day, the Yom HaKnisa, when we will collect the money for the Aniyim and divvy it up amongst the Aniyim, even though it's not Purim, but nevertheless, Matanos Avyonim is takana that's totally dependent and attached to Kriyas HaMegillah. Nesheinem Shal Aniyim Nesuos B'Mikra Megillah. That's where they come around to receive their charity, their gifts on the day of Mikra Megillah. Avol, and now we continue to Daf Hey, Simcha. In other words, when is it really Purim? Simcha means the Simcha Purim, the Suda Purim, Machal Mishteh, Eino Heges Elo Bismana, that'll be on Yud Tal. So this is already a split, like a brisker tzveidim in Purim. As far as Mikra Megillah and Matanos Avyonim is concerned, the Bnei Kfarim are going to read it and give out the Matanos Avyonim on Yom HaKnisa, which would be Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel. As far as Purim is concerned, the day of Purim, even for the Kfarim, is on Yudal. And that's when we're going to eat that soup. Omar Rav, Megillah Bismana, Korno Safilu B'Yoch. If we're reading it in its time, let's say the unwalled cities are reading the Megillah on the 14th, then they'll read it even B'Yoch. We don't have to gather the entire tzibur together. And the Pirsum Anes here will be achieved even with a Yochid. And why is it so? Because that is the day that everyone is reading the Megillah. So somehow that day, as the day of reading a Megillah, becomes the Pirsum Anes day. But Shalom Bismana, like for example, the Kfarim, they will read the Megillah, if necessary, on a Monday or Thursday, on Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yom HaKnisa, is then Basar. Pirsum Anes, when it's not the day of Purim, requires 10 people together. That is the Shita of Rav. Rav Asi disagrees. Rav Asi Omar, Bein Bismana, Bein Shalom Bismana, Basara. Is a Pella, the Shita of Rav Asi. The Rav Asi requires that the Megillah must be read Basara. You must have the critical minyan of 10 men in order to be mafarsim the nest. There's no pirsum without a minyan. And it doesn't matter whether that's the day of Purim or not the day of Purim. However, Rashi says this is only a mitzvah lechat tefillah b'di'eved. If he didn't find the minyan, he can read the Megillah b'yochid and fulfill his mitzvah. And in the footnote, he quotes this Sfas Emes, who explains Rashi, is Kol ma she'omru she'ein ma'akiv v'di'eved u'rak l'Rav Asi bizmano. Aval shelo bizmano ve'akiv af v'di'eved. Wow. According to Sfas Emes' interpretation of Rashi, then in Rav Asi's frame of reference, the first of the two shitos here, I'm sorry. Rav Asi was the second of the shitos. He would accept that b'di'eved you could read it without a minyan, but according to the first shita, and that's Rav, if it's Shalom Bismana, then it's absolutely critical that you have a minyan. There was a case of Purim on the 14th, and Rav was choshesh for Rav Asi, and he gathered together 10 people for Kriyas HaMegillah. Now this is very strange because it sounds like Rav is changing his tune over here. Because Rav originally said that Bismano is afilu b'yochid, that we don't have to run around looking for a minyan. But here he's saying like Rav Asi, we got to get together a minyan. So I guess Rav at some later point in his life sort of backtracked and embrace the Shita of Asi, which means that even Bismano, we have to worry about getting together a minyan, at least lechat tefillah. So Gemara asks, Umi Omar of Rav Hachi, is it really so that Rav ruled that in a case of Megillah Shalom Bismana, you must have Asar. Omar, Rabbi Yehuda Brei Rav Shmuel Bar Chilat Trei Rav. Purim Shechalios b'Shabbos. Again, we can't read the Megillah on Shabbos. Is Erev Shabbos Manu. We have to read the Megillah on Erev Shabbos. Now let's be medayik in the fact that Rav says Erev Shabbos Zmano. He doesn't say that we should read the Megillah a day early. He says that Erev Shabbos is Zman. This becomes the Zman Kavua that the Anshe Knesset Gedolah established for Kriyas HaMegillah in the case of Purim Chalios Shabbos. So the Gemara right away asks, Erev Shabbos Mano? Shabbos Mano. Right? The Takara of the Ad Sheknesset knows to read on the 14th. The 14th is on Shabbos. You can't tell me that Friday, the 13th, is Mano. Elolav, we have no choice but to interpret the words of Erev Shabbos Mano, Hachika. This is what he has in mind. Even though the Kriya Shalom is Mano, but it has the upgraded status of Kizmano. What is the significance of defining and classifying this Kriya on the 13th on Friday as Mano? Ma Zmanim Afil B'Yachid, Af Shalom Zmanim Afil B'Yachid. Now we're going to say that this reading on the 13th, which is technically Shalom Zmanim, is upgraded to the status of Zmanim. What do we gain by that? What extra yichus, what extra brownie points do you get by calling it Zmanim? The answer is that you could read it now B'Yachid. So we see that even though it's not Zmanim, because Zmanim is on Shabbos, but they can't read it on Shabbos, they can read it on Friday, which is the 13th. Nevertheless, they can read it B'Yachid. And that's against Rav's original quote here, in which he ruled that Kriyas of Megillah Shalom B'Zmanim requires Asara. So the Gemara says, look, that's not what Rav has in mind when he says Erev Shabbos Zmanim. But rather, L'inyan Mikra Megillah B'Asara. It doesn't mean that you could read the Megillah without a minyan. It's still Megillah Shalom B'Zmanim, which requires, according to Rabbah, Sarah. So what then is the significance of calling the 13th, which is a Friday, Zmanim, my Erev Shabbos Zmanim, Lafukim in the Rebbe? This is to exclude the sheet of Rebbe Dioma. Rebbe said back on Daf Dalet and Beis, in the case where the 14th was on Shabbos, that whole v'nitcha ayaros v'nkomo yitchu miyom haknisa. Once we're already removing the ayaros in this particular case, because they can't read it on Shabbos, we're removing it from the 14th. Let's bring them back to the 12th, to Yom HaKnisa, in order to link them up with the Kfarim. Hakamashma Rav says, Lafuki, in order to teach me against Rebbe, the Erev Shabbos Manamu, they will read it on Friday. We're not going to be makdim to Yom HaKnisa like the Tanakama. I'm sorry. We will not be makdim them to Yom HaKnisa like Rebbe, but rather like the Tanakama, who rejects and descends to the sheet of Rebbe. And therefore, we're going to read it on Erev Shabbos. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Hey, which Mirz Hashem, Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach will pick up tomorrow.
Very good. Great job fitting it all in.
Thank you so much. I'm telling you,